I was talking about peace in the world and peace in South Africa. And the third point, and I have this habit of always keeping the best for last. The third point was going to be all about peace in your heart, which I never got to. I was saving it for this week. But then somewhere around Thursday or Friday, I realized that that point wasn't going to be sufficient to keep us all busy until 11 o'clock. Not that you would complain about that, I'm just saying. So I actually had to put in a whole lot of work, turning the third point into something substantial enough to form a full sermon for this morning. And by now you've probably guessed it. That third point of last week has now evolved into 3 points of its very own. Life's unfair, hey? What can I say? Thank you for saying that. Just say that quite loudly so that everybody can hear.
We're lucky.
Thank you. Do you agree or disagree with Anita here? You better not answer that, okay? So I'm going to jump right in because I don't want to keep you until 11:15 every week. At least once a year I want to release you by 11 o'clock. So let's see how we go this morning. The first thing that I want to tell you when it comes to peace in your heart, I think we all have to be on the same page when it comes to believing that Jesus wants peace for us. I want that to be the kick-off point of what I need to tell you today. For if we don't believe that, we are not going to come very far. And so I want to say that this whole thing of giving peace to people's hearts is the thing that Jesus is all about. It is his forte. It is who he is. It is what he does. That is just how he rolls. It comes naturally flowing out of him. Wherever he went in his earthly ministry, that's exactly what he got up to. Spreading peace, offering hope, planting reassurance there where there was only doubt and uncertainty and fear. Wherever he went, miracles followed him automatically, and love and grace were his closest companions. I need to, in the next 20 minutes, bring all of us to this one important point, where you, beyond a shadow of any kind of doubt, feel convinced that this is Jesus' dream for your life, for your heart to be at peace. The first hint we get of Jesus being into this whole peace business is probably the calming of the storm in Matthew chapter 8. How Jesus got it right to actually take a bit of a kick downstairs while the seas were raging all around is nobody's business. But I go with what is recorded there, and that's what the story tells, that Jesus was actually having a little bit of a nap while his disciples upstairs were having a huge emergency. The Sea of Galilee is notorious for some wild, out-of-control storms, simply because a part of it is like a wind funnel through which the southeaster would blow like crazy, causing some water spouts. And of course, in this past week, we have seen that awful news of that super yacht having sunk in the Mediterranean. So it must have been similar sorts of situations that would arise on the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples had every reason to panic and be paranoid. And so they advised themselves to get a hold of the Master. Capital T, capital M. And so they spoiled Jesus in the land of Nod, dragged him upstairs and said to him, "Do something." And I'm always intrigued by Jesus' choice of words as he calms the storm. For he doesn't stand with his arms akimbo like this, shouting and screaming at the top of his voice. He simply seems to have said, "Peace, be still." It doesn't make it less of a command, I suppose, but I like it when Jesus says stuff which is followed by an exclamation mark. He should have just told the winds and the waves to behave themselves, to listen to him for a change. But there was none of that. The words he spoke could have been also spoken to somebody who was in crisis, going through something spiritually upsetting or emotionally soul-destroying. Peace. Be still. In Matthew chapter 5, we have the haunting story of a demon-possessed man having his life restored. Now, of course, Jesus seems to have first addressed his physical need, for he was physically not doing well. He was demon-possessed. He was living in a cemetery of all places, and apparently he would find pieces of sharp rock with which he would cut himself. He was stark, raving mad. And another way of putting that would be that there was no peace in his soul. That it was this endless storm raging inside of him day in and day out. Until, of course, Jesus arrived on the scene and healed him of all of that. Of course, there was the spiritual deliverance, but with that spiritual deliverance came the peace that this man so deeply craved. For the first time, he could have a meaningful and purpose-driven life. For the storm inside of him had gently dissipated. 2 weeks ago, I spoke on the bleeding woman, whose story we read in Matthew chapter 9. It's where Jesus makes his way to Jairus' house, remember? Oh, how fun is this? You remember what I said 2 weeks ago, but not last week. How does that work? Isn't life ironic? Anyway, 2 weeks ago I spoke on the bleeding woman, and she pushed through the crowd to get to Jesus. And I didn't say this at the time, probably because I only thought of it this week. She must also have had an enormous storm raging inside of her. And by meeting Jesus eyeball to eyeball, that storm was also settled. And all the strife and all the turmoil that she had known for 12 long years finally came to an end. She was at peace. In fact, the line with which Jesus sends her away was the following: "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And when one looks at the original Greek, go in peace could mean go and enter your life of peace and wellness. Exposing God's dream not only for her, but for every person who has ever lived. For us to actually have the peace that passes all understanding. For us to actually sleep sweetly at night. One classical example of somebody who was given peace, who probably didn't deserve it, was the man on the cross, hanging next to Jesus. He was a criminal, a thief, a baddie who was getting what he deserved. The Romans tried to get rid of him, just as they were trying to eliminate Jesus, and the other guy on Jesus' right. This guy was on Jesus' left, however, and he was a good-for-nothing, a degenerate. The world was going to be a better place later that day after he had breathed his last. He had nothing to offer Jesus. He was out of chances and out of opportunities. And so he thought to himself, well, I've got nothing to lose. I might as well pray to this Jewish teacher next to me and see what happens. And so he scrapes together a tidbit of faith and took the risk of saying, "Hey, Jesus, how about it, my man? I've heard all sorts of positive things about you. How does this deal sound? How about you promising me that you will think of me when you enter your kingdom this afternoon? I'm just putting it out there, Jesus. You can make up your mind." Jesus' response was shocking, horrifying even. It was a surprise above all surprises. For Jesus' reply to this man simply was, "Consider it done." And of course, I'm paraphrasing. Can you imagine the peace that descended on that vile soul at that point in time? Not only was his sins forgiven, not only was he going to be allowed to be with Jesus in paradise, he also now tasted a peace that he had never known before, ever in his life. And so he could close his eyes one final time with that kind of sense that things would be okay. Peace even for the most guilty and most ashamed among us. Interesting, we are not given his name, this guy who hung next to Jesus, this desperado, but I have always thought that a fitting name for him would be Lucky. For that is what he was, darn lucky to have made it in the nick of time. Peace was given to him even at the very last minute. My favorite example of peace arriving at somebody's home is probably what we read about in John chapter 11. John chapter 11 gives us Jesus being told that his buddy Lazarus had died. And of course, Jesus must have felt that he was entering a time of grief, a time of loss, for they had been pretty close. And so Jesus made his way to Bethany, where Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha, were living. Martha heard that Jesus was on his way, and so ran out the front door to meet him. At first, the reader would think that she was eager to see him, for he would bring hope and wholeness and love and care. But in fact, we are told that she didn't run towards Jesus because she wanted to embrace him. No, she wanted to get there as quickly as possible to accuse him of not having arrived in time. So Mary, this upset woman who had just lost and buried her brother, points a finger at Jesus' face and says to him, "You know what, Lord? This is in the street." She didn't even wait until Jesus had gone through their threshold at home. She points a finger to Jesus in the street and accuses him and says, "You know what? If you had been here earlier in the week, my brother wouldn't have died. I'm blaming you for this." Can you imagine the storm raging in Martha's heart? The seas going up and down, the winds and the waves being out of control. Her emotions were on a wild roller coaster. Somebody had to be her punch bag, and so she made it Jesus. Later in that chapter, we are told that Jesus eventually arrived at the home of Lazarus, and Martha, who had just accused him, and Mary. You're going to fall off your chair when you hear this. That Mary, who had been sitting waiting for Jesus to arrive, did the same as her sister had done only minutes before. She says the same thing. They were basically starting to sound like a broken record. For Mary repeated that accusatory line, saying, "You know what, Jesus? We've been waiting for you. Where the hell were you? If you had been here, Lazarus would have been dead and the world would have been a fine place. But because of you, there is this whole storm that has broken loose in our house and we're just not dealing with it properly." A storm had been unleashed on that day in Bethany, second to none. A storm that would flatten Mary and Martha and the entire community. And then just before Jesus supernaturally raises Lazarus from the dead, there's quite a bit of fascinating information in verses 33 to 35 of that passage. I'm in John 11 now. So the author says that Jesus was quite upset. that Jesus was feeling bewildered, and that Jesus was giving a big sigh to try and make sense of what was taking place. That we read of in verse 33. But then, of course, the most famous verse in that chapter has to be verse 35, where it says that Jesus wept. The shortest verse in all the scripture, but possibly the most loaded. For there we see that Jesus himself wasn't at peace at the time. That Jesus was fighting a battle deep within him. That he was upset. That he was struggling. That he was feeling frustrated and even a little fearful. And then he drops the bombshell on which the hinge of Christian history hangs. He says to Mary and Martha, as a comeback of him being held responsible for their brother's death, he says, clearing his throat, you know what? I might as well tell you. I am the resurrection, and I am the life. And those who believe in me will live although they die. And then, expecting a reply from them, he adds this verse for good measure. Mary and Martha, he asks, do you believe this? It's as if Jesus knew that they would never know peace until they came to that place of belief, until they came to that place of faith, until they came to that place of surrendering to him. And so today, I'm trying to make this point clear and strong. And I hope that something that I say is like music to your ears. For I want to say this one more time. Jesus wants peace for you. He wants there to be a deep knowing in your heart that things will be okay. The second thing I want to say is this. I did tell you that the 1-point sermon has now grown into 3 points, right? So I've given you a heads up. Secondly, I don't know how to say this nicely. You know, I'm in the business of words, so I always try to speak poetically, but sometimes I just can't. So I'm just going to give it to you as is. I want you to give your stuff to Jesus. We've established now that Jesus wants peace for all of us. Now the second step towards that reality will be us coming to the place and giving all our stuff to Jesus. That stuff that is stealing your joy, that stuff which is robbing you of having peace, that stuff which is destroying your life little by little, chipping away at you gradually, all that stuff I want you to give to Jesus today, if possible. What is it? Can you pinpoint what is the cause of your trauma? Is it past pain? You don't have to tell me to my face, but just answer this quietly in the private chambers of your heart. Is there past pain that you just have not been able to work through? Is that ruining your peace? Is that making it impossible for you to live a happy, fulfilled life? I am often taken aback by how many people I meet and how many people I minister to who have not worked through something that happened to them long ago. There's no reason that I can think of for you wanting to preserve that pain. What is holding on to it going to do for you? It's going to wreck you, is what it's going to do. So why don't you just release it and let it go and place it in the arms of Jesus? He kind of did say that all those who feel heavy laden and burdened and utterly, utterly tired of life could come to Him. So why not do so? Is there a regret chasing you like a ghost? A regret that you just haven't come to terms with? Or is it a disappointment that no one else knows about but you? But there it is, the elephant in the room, invisible to others, but you are constantly aware of it, 24/7. Is there a sense of rejection that you haven't allowed God's love to wash over? Is there a sense of guilt or a sense of shame bringing you incredible awkwardness and discomfort? I'm never sure of what you want me to say, but today I'm saying this: give it to Jesus. Is there an obsession bothering you? For the fact that you are a church person doesn't mean that you can't have obsessions. Neither does it mean that you can't have addictions. Is there a secret that you are trying so very hard to keep safe, but it's catching up on you and it's ruining your peace? Whatever it is, I would give it to Jesus if I were you. I say that that's what I've done. And here I am, living my best life. I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and you know I have a little bit of ADHD, so I never am fully present in the conversation. She was just waffling on, and I was trying to kind of cut my ribs, you know. I wasn't going to kind of eat with my hands in the spur. So yeah, she was. And I can't remember the exact context in which she said it, but when I came around, she was saying this line. She was saying, "Bevan, it looks to me like in the world right now that everybody's looking for something that they are not finding." And I didn't know, what to say to that, because I hadn't followed the conversation, because, my ribs were quite greasy, so I had to find a way of eating them decent and still look like a decent person in town, you know what I mean? It's like, I am a minister after all. Anyway, so I think, this is what I think. I think she had the lines that had built up to that statement, that everybody's looking for something that they are not finding. I think it was in the context of people doing a whole lot of church hopping. Okay, where people try a church and then they don't like it there, it doesn't fulfill their need, and then they try another church, maybe an ultra-conservative one, and then that doesn't do the trick for them, and then they try a liberal one, etc., etc., and they move around and they still don't seem to be finding what they need. And so I hope that I said the right thing to Lynn yesterday, having come into the conversation halfway, having revved a bit. I said to her, perhaps if they look for what they want in Jesus, they would find it. I know what He is able to do. I know that He is able to dry away your tears. I know that He is able to stop the bleeding. I know that He is able to bind up your gaping wounds. I know that because I have been there myself, and I have at first hand experienced it. I can think so very vividly of one time when my life was in a state of unpeace, where I was wrestling with stuff like you cannot begin to imagine. It had to do with a lady called Chloe. That's not a real name. I just didn't see the breakup coming. I was just too naked, I suppose. I thought she was into me. I thought that it was working well enough. But then just before the 1-year mark of being together, she said, bye-bye. And I cannot tell you, I wonder what word I should use. Probably the word devastated, actually. It was just before Christmas too. I will never sing Silent Night ever again in the same place. Anyway, I cannot tell you the time, the season of unease that my life entered into. I was struggling more than I ever expected to. I didn't think that it's possible for so much emotional pain to exist in one human heart. But then I realized what I had to do. I awakened to the fact that Jesus said that He would never reject anybody who comes to Him at any time. And so that's when I went. And it's almost as if I could physically remember how He embraced me, and how He gave me peace, and how He made me whole, and how He lifted up my head. So I know precisely what He's able to do. And I want you to do what I did. To give yourself to Jesus. All those bruised, beaten up, battered places of your life. So that His peace can descend over you. And so that His love can make you whole. The last thing I want to say today is this. That after this morning's message, I really, really hope that you will tell others about this sermon. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people whose lives are not in a state of peace at the moment. A lot of people who are fighting battles that they feel they're losing. I know a Jack and a Jill who need to hear the word of peace. And a Jordan and a Jesse. Well, I know a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker. I know so many people whose lives find themselves in stormy seas at the moment, where the waves are this high, where the winds are out of control. You know what? I want to run to them as fast as my legs can carry me, and I want to tell them that Jesus is the answer. And I want to tell them that what He's done for me, He can also do for them. It is my childlike prayer that something that I've said in the last half an hour, you will think worthwhile of sharing with somebody else in the week. For you know what? His touch has not lost its ancient power. No word from Him can fall fruitlessly to the ground. And so here in this solemn morning hour, I know that in His mercy, He will hear Number one, Jesus wants peace for you. Didn't he say in John 14, verse 27, as he was getting the disciples ready for his crucifixion, my peace I leave with you, not this cheap peace that the world gives, but my peace is what I leave for you. Paul must have been digging into that peace. That is why he could say in Philippians 4, verse 8, may the peace that passes all human understanding be yours. Secondly, you have to at some stage be daring enough to give your stuff, whatever your stuff is, to Jesus. And lastly, I hope that you will find at least one individual to tell about Jesus, friend of the broken, Savior of sinners, light of the world. In Ephesians, Paul goes as far as saying, Christ is our peace. May the peace of the Lord be yours. May this message be like sweet music on your ears. And may you hear Jesus coming to you today, speaking words of promise. Peace, you would say. Peace. Be still.